What if one small smile could ruin a dangerous man forever? In Baltimore, on a rain-soaked night by the harbor, a broke waitress named Grace Miller was just trying to survive another shift. Her feet ached. Her rent was overdue. The old diner that had kept her alive after losing everything was about to be torn down. Then Adrian Cole walked in. A man with money power and a past whispered about in back rooms. People feared him. Men obeyed him. Women wanted him. But Grace did the one thing nobody expected. She smiled at him like he was human. And that smile became the first crack in a monster's armor. Watch this story until the end. Because this is not just about love. It is about loyalty, danger, redemption, and the price of saving someone who may destroy you first. Like this video and comment where you're watching from. Before Grace ever heard that warning, before the $100 bill lay on the counter like a threat dressed as kindness, before Adrian Cole looked at her as if a single smile had cut through years of blood and silence, there was only morning. Cold Baltimore morning. The kind that came in gray and stayed gray, pressing itself against the harbor windows until the whole city looked tired. Fog crawled above the water near Fell's Point, thin as breath. Seagulls screamed over the docks. Delivery trucks groaned along the narrow streets, their tires hissing over wet pavement. Somewhere near the piers, a horn sounded low and mournful, like the city clearing its throat before another hard day. Grace Miller pushed through the back door of the Harbor Light Diner at 6:15, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of cheap gas station coffee, the other holding her coat closed because the zipper had broken 2 winters ago. The kitchen lights flickered when she stepped inside. They always did. Marlene said the wiring had personality. Grace called it a lawsuit waiting to happen, but only in her head. Out loud, she said nothing because the diner had kept her fed for almost 2 years, and people who were kept alive by fragile things learned not to insult them too loudly. She hung her coat on the bent hook near the freezer tied on her apron and stood for a second in front of the small mirror above the employee sink. The mirror had a crack down the left side. It split her reflection so one eye looked lower than the other. 23 years old, Grace thought, and already looking like a woman who had been asked to carry too much. Her brown hair was pulled into a loose knot with soft pieces escaping around her face. Her uniform was pale yellow, though years of bleach had turned it closer to the color of old paper. She had dark circles under her eyes and a faint burn mark on her wrist from the coffee pot she had grabbed too quickly the day before. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her dress. She pulled it out and saw the reminder from her landlord. Rent due. Final notice. Under that, another missed call from the student loan company. Grace stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then she locked it without answering. Not today, she whispered. Her voice sounded small in the empty kitchen. From the office came the scratchy sound of Marlene Hayes's old radio playing a country song from some time before Grace was born. Marlene had arrived first, as always. The woman could complain about her knees, her back, the city, the mayor, and the price of eggs, but she still opened the diner every morning before sunrise like church bells had called her personally. Grace stepped into the dining room. The harbor light was ugly in the way beloved things sometimes were. The booths were cracked red vinyl patched in places with silver tape. The counter stools spun unevenly. The pie case hummed so loudly it sounded alive. A row of faded photographs lined the back wall showing fishermen waitresses, Little League teams, a 4th of July parade, a snowstorm from 1982, and Marlene at 19 with big hair, bright lipstick, and a cigarette hanging from her fingers like a dare. The neon sign in the front window blinked twice, then held. Open. Grace loved that sign more than she admitted. She turned on the coffee machine. It coughed, rattled, then began its familiar gurgle. The smell rose quickly, bitter and dark. Soon it mixed with bacon grease, cinnamon, old floor cleaner, and the faint salt smell that drifted in whenever the harbor wind found a crack in the door. It was not the kind of place people photographed. It was the kind of place people returned to because it remembered them. By 6:30, Marlene came out of the office with a clipboard tucked under one arm and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She was 62, short, broad-shouldered, with silver curls pinned badly beneath a hairnet. She had kind eyes and a mouth built for telling people the truth before they were ready for it. "You eat yet?" Marlene asked. Grace reached for mugs under the counter. "I had coffee." "That is not food." It was brown and warm. "Close enough." Marlene gave her a look. Grace gave one back. The argument ended the way it always did, with Marlene sliding 2 pieces of toast onto a small plate and pushing it toward her. "Eat before the dock boys come in. They'll inhale everything not nailed down." Grace took a bite because saying no to Marlene was harder than surviving on 3 hours of sleep. The bell above the door rang at 6:42. The first customer was June Whitaker. June arrived every morning in a lavender coat, even in rain. Her white hair sat in a careful helmet around her face. She walked slowly, but she never let anyone help her unless the sidewalk was icy. She had been widowed for 7 years and still ordered 2 coffees by mistake once a month. "Morning." "Gracie," June said, settling into the window booth. "Morning, Miss June." "Usual, unless the good Lord changed my mind while I was sleeping." Grace smiled and brought black coffee, 1 cream on the side, 2 slices of wheat toast, and strawberry jam. June always said she liked the corner booth because the light was best. Everyone knew it was because her husband had sat across from her there every Saturday for 38 years. Grace never mentioned that. Some grief deserved privacy even in public places. At 7, Walter Reed came in carrying 3 newspapers under one arm and a paper bag from his bookstore next door. He was tall, thin, and brown-skinned with silver hair and wire glasses that constantly slid down his nose. He owned Reed's Used Books, a narrow shop with crooked shelves, old jazz records, and a cat named Bishop who hated everyone except children and Walter. Walter took the last booth by the wall. Coffee. Walter. If it can legally be called that, you keep drinking it. I keep hoping for growth in your character. Grace filled his cup until it almost touched the rim. Careful. That much optimism could kill you. Walter looked over his glasses at her. If I die here, make sure Marlene spells my name right on the memorial pancake. Grace laughed under her breath as she moved back to the counter. By 7:30, the harbor light had a pulse. 2 dock workers in orange vests argued about the Ravens. A nurse from the night shift fell asleep with one hand around a mug. A young mother split pancakes between 2 small boys and counted coins when she thought no one saw. Marlene saw. Grace saw, too. Neither said anything when Marlene rang the order in at half price. That was the harbor light. Nobody called it charity. They called it a mistake on the register and extra biscuit coffee poured and forgotten on the bill. Grace moved through the room with practiced rhythm. Coffee in her right hand, plates balanced along her left arm, smile ready, feet aching, mind working 3 problems at once. Table 3 needed ketchup. Walter wanted more coffee but planned to pretend he did not. The nurse had 15 minutes before her bus. The little boy near the door was about to knock over his orange juice. Grace caught the glass before it tipped, set it back, and winked at him. Nice try. He grinned with syrup on his chin. Moments like that were small, almost nothing. Yet they were the stitches holding Grace together. After her parents died, the world had become a place with no floor. She had been 21 then, studying nursing at Towson University, living in a dorm room with cheap string lights and a roommate who snored. She had been the kind of girl who made plans. Clinical hours, scholarships, a used car by spring, a small apartment after graduation, maybe pediatrics, maybe emergency medicine, something useful, something that mattered. Then the police came to her dorm during a February storm. Her parents had been driving home from visiting her aunt in Pennsylvania. A truck lost control on I-83. The officer said they did not suffer because people always said that when they had nothing else to offer. Grace went home for the funeral. She packed one suitcase. She never unpacked it at school again. Grief did not arrive like sadness. It arrived like fog inside her bones. She forgot assignments, missed calls, stared at textbooks until the words slid off the page. Bills came. Sympathy cards stopped. The university sent forms. The bank sent notices. Everyone expected a signature from a girl who still smelled her mother's perfume in the hallway closet. Marlene had found her sitting on the curb outside the diner one afternoon in April, crying so hard she could not breathe. Grace had come to ask about the help wanted sign, but when Marlene opened the door, all the strength went out of her. Marlene did not ask for a resume. She did not ask why Grace had not finished college or why her hands shook. She just handed her a napkin and said, "Start with coffee, baby. The rest of life can wait 5 minutes." So Grace started with coffee, then toast, then tables, then rent, then waking up. Month by month, the harbor light gave shape to her days until life, while still broken, became something she could carry. That was why the rumors hurt. At first they were little things. A man in a dark suit taking pictures of the laundromat, a notice taped to the old machine shop door, a rent increase at the barber's place on Thames Street. Then the corner apartments were sold and everyone knew someone who had 30 days to leave. Luxury was creeping in from the waterline. It came with clean glass balconies, black awnings, rooftop cocktails, and words like revitalization printed on banners. It came with people who spoke gently about progress while signing papers that emptied buildings. Grace had watched it happen block by block. The old crab shack became a wine bar. The pawn shop became a wellness studio. A family grocery became a boutique selling candles named after weather. Nobody said poor people were not welcome. They just built a world where poor people could no longer afford to stand still. That morning, the rumor finally became a name. Walter was reading the business section when he stopped so suddenly that Grace noticed from across the room. His jaw tightened. Marlene saw it too. What she asked. Walter folded the paper with too much care. Cole Development. The dock workers stopped arguing. Even the radio seemed to lower itself. Grace set a plate in front of June, then looked toward Walter. What about Cole Development? Walter's eyes flicked to Marlene. Marlene went very still. Walter, she said softly. He sighed. They bought the block. The words did not make a loud sound, but they changed the room. June's spoon paused above her coffee. One of the dock workers muttered something Grace did not catch. The nurse opened her eyes. Grace wiped her hands on her apron, though they were not wet. What block? Walter looked at her with an old man's sadness. This one, Gracie. Harbor Light. My shop. The laundromat. The apartments above it. All the way down to the warehouse. Marlene took one step back as if the floor had shifted. Grace looked at her. You knew. Marlene's face hardened with the effort of staying composed. I knew the landlord was talking to buyers. I did not know it closed. Who is Cole Development? Grace asked. Nobody answered quickly enough. That was an answer by itself. One of the dock workers, a broad man named Eddie, leaned over the counter. Adrian Cole. Marlene snapped Eddie. He lifted both hands. What? She asked. Grace looked between them. Why does everyone look like you just said the devil's full government name? Walter removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Adrian Cole is a developer, a very rich one. He buys distressed properties and turns them into things people like us can look at from the sidewalk. Eddie gave a humorless laugh. That is the public version. Grace's stomach tightened, and the private version. Marlene spoke before Eddie could. The private version is none of our business. Walter looked at her. Marlene. She turned on him. Don't. But the room had already changed, and silence had become its own kind of confession. Eddie lowered his voice anyway. People say Cole got his first money from the Rourkes. The name landed ugly. Grace had heard it in pieces, mostly from customers who followed crime news the way others followed sports. The Rourke family had old roots in Baltimore, Boston, New York. Irish bars, union contracts, construction bids, missing witnesses, men with clean suits and dirty hands. People say a lot, Marlene said. They say he cleaned their money. Eddie continued. Then got big enough to walk away. Walter looked toward the window. Nobody walks away from men like that. Not clean. Grace tried to picture the man behind the name, but all she saw was a shadow in an expensive suit. A man who bought neighborhoods. A man who did not need to raise his voice because papers did the damage for him. Marlene clapped her hands once sharp enough to break the spell. All right. Enough. Food is getting cold, coffee is getting burnt, and fear does not pay the electric bill. The room slowly resumed its sounds, but they came back wrong. Lower, tighter. Grace returned to work because there was nothing else to do. Plates still needed clearing, coffee still needed pouring, bills still waited in the dark. Near noon, she found Marlene in the office with the door half open. The older woman sat at the desk, holding the phone to her ear, though nobody was on the other end. Her eyes were wet. A stack of unopened envelopes lay beside her elbow. Grace knocked softly, Marlene. Marlene looked up fast and wiped her face with the heel of her hand. Allergies. It is February. Dust, then. Grace stepped inside. Tell me we're not closing. Marlene pressed her lips together. For a second, she looked not like the woman who ran the harbor light, but like someone who had been running too long. I'd love to, sweetheart. Grace felt the words enter her chest and sit there. She looked around the office. The walls were covered with old schedules, vendor invoices, Polaroids of past staff holiday cards from customers, a calendar from a seafood supplier 2 years out of date. It was cluttered, cramped, and smelled faintly of coffee grounds. It was Marlene's kingdom, a kingdom built from receipts, stubbornness, and pie. What happens to you? Grace asked. Marlene smiled, but it broke halfway. I got a sister in Florida who keeps telling me to come help with her guest house. You hate Florida. I hate humidity. I can learn to hate it with family. Grace shook her head. What happens to me? Marlene looked at her, then really looked. The answer did not come. That was how Grace knew no one had one. The black SUV arrived 3 days later. It pulled up just after the breakfast rush, glossy and silent against the curb outside the diner. It looked wrong on that street, too clean, beside the rusted parking meters and cracked brick storefronts. Grace saw it first through the front window. Then everyone saw it. The driver got out and opened the back door. A woman stepped onto the sidewalk in a cream wool coat, her dark hair pinned perfectly at the nape of her neck. She had red lips, high heels, and the kind of stillness money gave people when they had never needed to hurry for a bus. Then Adrian Cole emerged. Grace hated that her first thought was not monster. It was beautiful, not pretty, not soft. Beautiful the way a blade was beautiful before someone used it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked custom-made to obey him. His black hair was touched with silver at the temples. His face was all hard lines and controlled expression. He did not scan the block like a visitor. He looked at it like a man reading something he already owned. The diner went quiet. Marlene came to Grace's side and gripped her arm. Smile like we're not dying, she murmured. Grace swallowed. I don't think my face does that. Then fake it better. The bell rang. Adrian Cole stepped inside and the harbor light seemed smaller around him. The woman in cream followed. Her gaze moved across the room with polite disappointment. Marlene walked forward with a brightness so sharp it almost cut. "Mr. Cole, welcome to Harbor Light. I'm Marlene Hayes, the manager." Adrian shook her hand. "Mrs. Hayes." His voice was deep calm and edged with something Grace could not place. Not quite Baltimore, not quite old money. Something sanded down. "This is Vivian Sterling," he said. Vivian smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "Charming place," she said. Nobody believed her. Adrian's gaze moved over the diner, the taped booths, the old photos, the pie case, Walter's newspapers, June's lavender coat, the dock workers pretending not to stare. Then his eyes found Grace. For 1 second, all the noise in her body stopped. He looked at her as if she had interrupted a thought he did not want anyone to see. Marlene turned quickly. "Grace, coffee for Mr. Cole." Grace reached for the pot. Her hand stayed steady, though she felt every pair of eyes in the diner. She carried a mug to the corner booth, set it down, and poured. Adrian watched the coffee rise. Then he watched her. Up close, he was more unsettling. There was a small scar near his jaw, almost hidden. His eyes were gray, but not soft gray. Storm gray, harbor gray. The kind of gray that came before things broke. Cream Grace asked, "No. Sugar, no." She nodded and started to step away. Then habit saved her from freezing. She gave him the smile she gave tired truckers grieving widows' children with sticky hands and men who looked like they had forgotten how to be treated gently. Small, warm, human. Adrian went still. It was so subtle that no one else seemed to notice. But Grace did. His fingers tightened once against the mug. Vivian looked at her watch. Marlene began talking too fast about the diner's history, about neighborhood loyalty, about generations of customers, about the breakfast rush, about how the Harbor Light had survived recessions, storms, fires, and one health inspector with a personal vendetta. Adrian listened. He asked questions that sounded casual but cut straight to numbers. Revenue, lease terms, repairs, foot traffic, staff size. Grace moved behind the counter, but she heard everything. Each question felt like a nail measured before being driven into a coffin. Finally, Marlene stopped talking. Adrian placed both hands around the coffee mug, though he had barely touched it. "I want to be direct," he said. The room tightened. "I purchased this block as part of a larger waterfront redevelopment project." Marlene's smile disappeared. "The Harbor Light." Adrian looked at her. "The building is scheduled for demolition." June Whitaker's spoon slipped from her fingers and clattered against the table. Walter closed his newspaper. Grace felt the air leave her lungs. Marlene's voice came out flat. "When final dates are still being arranged, that is not an answer." "No," Adrian said. "It is not." Grace stared at him, anger rising hot beneath her ribs. He did not sound cruel. That made it worse. Cruelty could be hated cleanly. This calm, measured destruction felt almost polite. Marlene lifted her chin. "People work here, Mr. Cole. People depend on this place. I know." Grace almost laughed. He knew. Of course he knew. Men like him always knew. They just called knowing due diligence. Adrian continued. "Employees will receive severance. I am also putting together relocation assistance for affected businesses." Marlene looked around the diner, at June's booth, at Walter's old newspaper stack, at the counter where Grace had learned how to keep breathing after grief. "Money cannot relocate memories," Marlene said. For the first time, Adrian looked away, only for a second. But Grace saw that too. Vivian touched his sleeve. "Adrian, we have another meeting." He nodded, then stood. The diner remained silent as he buttoned his suit jacket. At the door he paused. His eyes found Grace again. Miss Miller, he said. She had not told him her last name. Her skin prickled. Marlene stepped forward immediately. "What do you need with Grace?" Adrian's expression did not change. "A moment. She is working. It is not about work." Grace should have stayed behind the counter. She should have let Marlene speak for her. She should have remembered that men like Adrian Cole did not ask for moments unless they already owned the clock. Instead, she untied her apron and laid it beside the register. "It's fine," she said. Marlene's eyes warned her. Grace ignored the warning because curiosity had always been one of her worst survival instincts. Outside, the cold wind came off the harbor and slipped under her sleeves. Adrian stood beside the black SUV. Vivian waited a few steps away, phone in hand, pretending not to listen while clearly listening. For a moment, Adrian said nothing. Grace folded her arms. "You wanted a moment." He looked at her with that same unnerving focus. "You smiled at me." Grace blinked. "That is what this is about." "Yes." She stared at him, waiting for the rest. None came. A laugh escaped her, short and disbelieving. "You are tearing down the only place that has kept half this block standing, and you pulled me outside to talk about my customer service." His jaw shifted. "It was not customer service. You do not know me well enough to say that." "No," he said quietly. "I do not." The honesty disarmed her for half a breath. Then anger stepped back in. "Then let me help you. I smile because it is my job. I smile when I am tired. I smile when customers are rude. I smile when I am trying not to cry in the walk-in freezer." "It does not mean anything." Adrian studied her. That one did. Grace hated the way her pulse answered him. She looked toward the diner window. Marlene stood behind the glass arms crossed, watching like a guard dog in orthopedic shoes. Grace turned back. "You people always do that." Adrian's brow moved slightly. "What people?" "Rich people. Powerful people. You take something ordinary from someone poor and decide it is special because you noticed it." For the first time, something like pain passed through his eyes. It was gone fast. "You are not wrong to hate me," he said. "I don't hate you." "No, I don't know you." His mouth curved barely. "Fair." A car passed too close to a puddle, sending dirty water across the curb. Grace stepped back, but not fast enough. Cold spray hit her shoes. Adrian looked down. Her cheap black work shoes were soaked. For some reason, that embarrassed her more than the overdue rent notice, more than the cracked diner windows, more than having him see the life he was about to break. She lifted her chin. Was that all? Adrian reached into his coat and removed a business card. Thick, white cardstock, black lettering. Simple, expensive. He held it out. Grace did not take it. "What is that an offer?" Her eyes narrowed. "For what I am building something on this block. A cafe. A proper one. Community-focused. Well-funded. Better wages. Benefits." Grace stared at him. "You close our diner, then offer me a job and its replacement, no." The word was firm. "I am offering you a chance to help shape what replaces it." Grace laughed again, but this time it hurt. "You are unbelievable. I have been called worse. I believe that." This time the corner of his mouth moved for real. Vivian cleared her throat from near the SUV. "Adrian." He ignored her. Grace looked at the card, then at him. "Why me?" His answer came too quickly to be a lie and too quietly to be practiced. "Because you looked at me like I was human." The wind moved between them. For a moment, Grace had no response. Behind Adrian, the harbor was dull and gray. Behind Grace, the diner glowed with weak yellow light, old and doomed and still breathing. She reached for the card at last. Her fingers brushed his. A small contact. Nothing more. Still, Adrian looked at their hands as if the touch had cost him something. Grace pulled away first. "I have to get back to work. You do." She turned toward the diner. "Miss Miller." She stopped but did not face him. His voice came lower. "Grace." Her name in his mouth felt dangerous. She turned. Adrian looked at her with a calm so complete it almost hid the hunger underneath. "Do not mistake this for pity." Grace held up the card. "And you do not mistake my taking this for trust." Then she went back inside. The bell rang over her head. The diner's warmth wrapped around her, full of grease coffee, worry, and old wood. Every face turned toward her. Marlene came close. "What did he say?" Grace looked down at the card in her hand. Adrian Cole. Cole Development. A downtown address printed in black. She could still feel the brief touch of his fingers against hers. "He offered me a job," Grace said. The words landed harder than she expected. Marlene closed her eyes. Walter whispered something under his breath. June reached for her coffee with shaking hands. Outside, the black SUV pulled away from the curb, carrying Adrian Cole back into whatever world men like him belonged to. Grace stood in the middle of the harbor light with his card burning against her palm, while the old neon sign blinked in the window behind her. Open, open, open. Grace carried Adrian Cole's business card through the rest of her shift like it had weight. It sat in the pocket of her apron, pressed against her hip, while she poured coffee, cleared plates, refilled napkin holders, and smiled at customers who had no idea her world had just cracked open in the cold air outside. Every time she moved, the card brushed against her dress, small and stiff and impossible to forget. She tried to pretend nothing had changed. That was what working people did when the sky fell. They kept moving because somebody still wanted eggs over easy. Somebody still needed the check split 3 ways. Somebody still complained the toast was too dark. But the room knew. The harbor light knew. Marlene watched her from the pass window with worried eyes. Walter Reed kept reading the same page of his newspaper without turning it. June Whitaker sat with both hands around her coffee cup, staring out at the street where Adrian's black SUV had disappeared. By 2 in the afternoon, the breakfast rush had become lunch, and lunch had faded into that strange, quiet hour when the diner breathed between crowds. Grace stood behind the counter wiping a clean spot that was already clean. Marlene came up beside her. "You are going to rub a hole straight through that counter." Grace stopped moving. The rag hung limp in her hand. "I do not know what to do with this," she said. Marlene held out her palm. Grace pulled the card from her pocket and gave it to her. Marlene read it once, then again. "Did he say what kind of job?" "He said he is building a cafe. He wants me to help shape it." Marlene's mouth tightened. "That man has nerve." Grace looked toward the old photos on the wall. "Does it make me terrible that I want to know more?" Marlene did not answer right away. That frightened Grace more than a lecture would have. Finally, Marlene gave the card back. "No. It makes you 23 and scared." Grace swallowed hard. "I am not scared. Baby, I have seen you carry 3 hot plates through a room full of screaming kids without blinking. This is scared." Grace folded the card between both hands until the edges pressed into her skin. "I hate him." "No, you do not." Grace turned. Marlene leaned one hip against the counter, her face tired in the yellow light. "You want to hate him because it would be simple. But simple is a luxury we almost never get." Grace looked down. "He is destroying us. He is. And he offered me a way out. He did. So, what does that make me if I take it?" Marlene's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. Alive. The word sat between them. Grace wanted to reject it. She wanted a cleaner answer, one made of loyalty and pride, and something noble enough to live on. But pride did not pay rent. Loyalty did not cover dental bills. Nobility did not call the student loan company and make them stop. That night she walked home under a low sky that threatened snow but never committed to it. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a narrow brick building near Patterson Park, in a unit that smelled faintly of old radiator heat and someone else's cooking. The hallway light was out again. Grace climbed the stairs in darkness, one hand against the wall, counting the steps by memory. Inside the apartment greeted her with silence. It was small enough that she could see almost everything from the door. A thrift store couch, a low table with chipped corners, a narrow bed behind a curtain she had hung for the illusion of separation, 2 mugs in the sink, a plant on the windowsill that refused to die, though Grace regularly forgot it existed. She kicked off her wet shoes and dropped onto the couch. The business card landed on the table in front of her. Adrian Cole. The letters looked too calm for what they had done. Her phone rang at 7:13. Unknown number. Grace stared at it until the final ring, then answered. Grace Miller. A woman's voice came through crisp and professional. Miss Miller, my name is Elise Harper. I am calling from Mr. Cole's office regarding the management opportunity discussed with you today. Grace sat up slowly. I have not agreed to anything. Of course. Mr. Cole wanted you to have the details before making any decision. Grace almost laughed. Of course he did. Men like Adrian Cole never left people with simple choices. They dressed traps as options and made sure the door was polished. Elise continued. The role would be general manager of the new community cafe within the Harbor Point redevelopment project. Starting salary is $82,000 annually, with full medical, dental, and vision coverage. 4 weeks paid vacation. Performance bonuses based on quarterly targets. There is also a signing bonus of $30,000 payable upon completion of the employment agreement. Grace did not breathe. The radiator hissed. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far enough away to belong to someone else. I am sorry, Grace said. How much? $30,000. Grace looked at the stack of bills on the table. The electric notice, the rent notice, the unopened envelope from the hospital where her mother had died still sending paperwork as if grief came with an office extension. That is a lot of money, Grace said. Yes, Miss Miller. No, I mean that is a ridiculous amount of money. There was a polite pause. Mr. Cole believes the transition may place you under financial strain. He wants to ensure you are protected. Protected. The word made Grace's stomach turn. Protected from the problem he created. Elise was silent for half a second. I am only authorized to provide the details of the offer. Grace closed her eyes. Of course. Is there a deadline Mr. Cole requests a response within 72 hours? Grace opened her eyes. That sounds like pressure. Mr. Cole asked me to say that he does not intend it as pressure. The project is moving quickly, and he will need to hire externally if you decline. Grace leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. 72 hours to decide whether to stay loyal to a sinking ship or climb into the lifeboat offered by the man who drilled the hole. Thank you, she said, though the words tasted wrong. After the call ended, Grace did not move for a long time. $82,000. She currently made just over 24 counting tips on good weeks. $30,000 up front. That was more money than she had ever seen in one place. More than her parents had kept in savings. More than enough to pay back rent, fix the heat, buy groceries without checking the price of eggs, see a doctor about the pain in her side that came and went, and maybe breathe for the first time in years. It should have felt like mercy. Instead, it felt like someone had placed a warm coat around her shoulders while burning down her house. Grace opened her laptop. The old machine took several minutes to wake, groaning softly as if it too resented the day. When the browser finally loaded, she typed Adrian Cole's name. The search results filled the screen. Adrian Cole, founder and chief executive of Cole Development. Adrian Cole announces major Baltimore waterfront revitalization project. Cole Foundation donates $2 million to Youth Housing Initiative. Questions remain about Cole Development's early financing. Federal investigation into Rourke Network expands. Grace clicked article after article. The public version of Adrian was polished enough to blind people. He stood beside mayors in tailored suits. He shook hands with nonprofit directors. He cut ribbons in front of apartment buildings with bright murals and smiling children. He spoke about Access Investment Dignity Community. Then there were the other articles. Older, less certain. Full of phrases like alleged connections, unnamed sources, no charges filed, declined to comment. The Rourke family appeared again and again. Construction contracts, union pressure, missing money, a witness who recanted, a former accountant found dead in a parked car outside Newark. Adrian's name never sat in the center of those stories. It hovered near the edges, never accused, never cleared, always close enough to cast a shadow. Grace found a photograph from 12 years earlier. Adrian was younger, leaner, standing outside a courthouse in a dark coat. His face was expressionless, but his eyes looked different, harder, hungrier. Beside him walked a man identified as Vincent Rourke, reputed head of the Rourke organization. Vincent looked directly at the camera and smiled. Grace shut the laptop. The apartment seemed colder. She stood and went to the window. Across the street, a corner store buzzed under fluorescent lights. A man in a hoodie walked a dog through the mist. A bus exhaled at the stop doors, folding open to release 2 exhausted nurses and a teenager with headphones. Real life kept happening. That was the cruelest thing about impossible choices. The world never paused to let you make them. Grace slept badly. When she woke, her neck hurt from the couch and dawn had turned the room pale blue. The business card was still on the table. At the diner, Marlene knew before Grace said anything. "You got the numbers," she said. Grace paused with her hand on the coffee pot. "How did you know? You look like someone offered you heaven and charged admission in guilt." Grace looked toward the booths. June had not arrived yet. Walter was late. The room felt too empty for this conversation. "They offered me $82,000 a year." Marlene's eyes widened before she could hide it. "And a $30,000 signing bonus." Marlene lowered herself onto a stool. "Good Lord." Grace laughed once, but it came out thin. "I know." Marlene rubbed both hands over her face. "You are taking it." Grace stared at her. "Do not say that. I am saying it because you need somebody to. How can you tell me to work for him?" Marlene looked at the diner around them. The cracked seats, the old counter, the coffee machine held together by prayer and aggression. Because this place gave you a place to stand. It was never supposed to be the cage you died in. Grace's eyes burned. "It is not a cage." "No," Marlene said softly. "But poverty can turn anything into one." Grace looked away. Marlene reached across the counter and touched her wrist. "I love this diner. I have loved it longer than you have been alive. I loved it when my husband was still breathing. I loved it when my knees worked and the sign did not flicker, and we had a line out the door every Sunday after church. But love does not make the roof stop leaking. It does not make the landlord fair. It does not make old neighborhoods safe from men with money." Grace's voice dropped. "It feels like blood money. Then wash it with what you build." Grace looked back at her. Marlene's eyes were wet now, but she did not wipe them. If you go there, you do not go as his pretty little charity case. You hear me? You go with your spine straight. You make them put everything in writing. You keep something affordable on that menu. You hire people from around here if you can. You make a place where June can sit without feeling poor. You make Walter complain about coffee until he is 90. A laugh broke through Grace's tears. He is already 90 in spirit. Marlene squeezed her wrist. Then honor that. The diner's final week began with a notice taped to the front window. Grace watched people read it. Some shook their heads and walked away. Some came inside quieter than usual. A few got angry because anger was easier than grief. June Whitaker cried into a napkin when Marlene told her they would close at the end of the month. Walter Reed said nothing for nearly an hour. Then he returned from his bookstore with a heavy old book on restaurant management and handed it to Grace. "You will need this," he said. Grace held it against her chest. "I have not decided." Walter gave her a tired look. "Yes, you have. You are just waiting for your guilt to catch up." The dock workers left tips too large for their orders. One of them, Eddie, refused to look at her when he said, "Do not let them turn it into one of those places where coffee tastes like burnt flowers." Grace promised she would try. On the last Friday, Marlene baked every pie the kitchen could handle: apple, cherry, sweet potato, chocolate cream. The diner smelled like butter and sugar and ending. People came all day. Former waitresses, old customers, a man who had proposed to his wife in booth 4, a woman who said her father used to bring her there after Little League games, a retired police officer who claimed the Harbor Light had the only decent meatloaf left in Baltimore. Grace served them all. She smiled until her face hurt and cried only twice in the walk-in freezer. Near closing, she found Marlene alone at the counter looking at the old bell above the door. "You should take it," Marlene said. Grace followed her gaze. "The bell. It has announced enough heartbreak. Maybe it deserves better news." Grace could not speak. Marlene reached up, unscrewed the small brass bell from the frame, and placed it in Grace's hands. It was heavier than it looked. "Bring it with you," Marlene said. Grace held it carefully. "What if I fail?" Marlene's smile was sad and proud. "Then fail standing up." The next morning, Grace called the number on Adrian's card. Elise answered. Grace's voice was steady. "I want to meet Mr. Cole." The appointment was set for 3 that afternoon. Grace wore the best dress she owned, black and plain, with a small tear near the hem she repaired with careful stitches. She brushed her hair until it shone, then tied it back because leaving it loose felt like pretending to be someone else. The headquarters of Cole Development rose downtown in a tower of glass and steel. Grace stood outside for almost a full minute, looking up until her neck hurt. Inside the lobby was quiet enough to make her aware of her own breathing. Marble floors reflected soft light. A security guard checked her name. A receptionist with perfect nails smiled and directed her to the private elevator. Grace stepped in. As the doors closed, she saw herself in the mirrored wall. Same face, different floor beneath her feet. When the elevator opened, Elise was waiting. She led Grace through a hallway lined with abstract art and city maps, then stopped before a corner office. Adrian stood by the window with his back to the door, looking down at Baltimore. For a moment, Grace saw what he must see. Streets, buildings, blocks, possibility, profit. Then she saw what she saw. Homes, tables, old men with newspapers, women counting tips, places that held people when nothing else did. Adrian turned. His expression changed when he saw her, though he controlled it quickly. "Grace." She stepped inside. "Mr. Cole." "Adrian," he said. She did not give him that. Not yet. "I am accepting the position." The words came out clean. His face softened. "I am glad. I have conditions." That stopped him. "Good." Grace took the folded paper from her purse. Her hands did not shake. I report to Patricia Sloan, not directly to you. I want a real employment contract reviewed by a lawyer. I want hiring priority given to qualified workers from this neighborhood. I want a permanent, low-cost coffee option, not a temporary promotion, not charity. A real menu item people from Harborlight can afford. Adrian watched her with a stillness that made lesser men seem noisy. And if I say no, Grace lifted her chin. Then I walk out of here and keep whatever is left of myself. Silence filled the office. Below them, the city moved in miniature. Finally, Adrian crossed the room and took the paper from her hand. His fingers did not touch hers this time. He read every line. Then he looked up. You came prepared. You offered me a job, not a rescue. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval. Hunger. Maybe both. No, he said. I offered you a door. Grace held his gaze. I decide how I walk through it. For the first time since she had met him, Adrian Cole smiled like something in him had been answered. Then walked through it. Grace Miller. He held out his hand. Grace looked at it. A handshake was supposed to be simple. Agreement. Business. A beginning. But nothing about Adrian Cole was simple. She took his hand anyway. His grip was warm, firm, careful. The city glowed behind him, and for one breath Grace felt the strange terror of a life changing while she was still inside it. When she left the office, the contract process began before she reached the elevator. Emails, signatures, legal review instructions from Elise. A schedule from Patricia Sloan. By evening, the signing bonus had been initiated. By midnight, Grace sat on her couch staring at the banking app, refreshing until the number appeared. $30,000. Real. Impossible. Hers. She covered her mouth with both hands, but the sound escaped anyway. Not laughter. Not crying. Something between the two. The next morning, Grace returned to the Harborlight before sunrise. Marlene was already there. Grace placed the old brass bell on the counter between them. I took it, she said. Marlene nodded once. No surprise, no judgment, just love, heavy and quiet. Then make it count. Grace picked up the bell. The metal was cool against her palm. Outside, Baltimore was waking under a pale gray sky. Inside the diner smelled of coffee and cinnamon and goodbye. At 8 on Monday morning, Grace walked into Cole Development with the bell wrapped in a scarf inside her purse, and the marble floor swallowed the sound of her steps. The building did not smell like coffee grease rain or toast. It smelled like cold air, polished stone, expensive perfume, and decisions made far above the heads of ordinary people. Grace stood in the lobby for half a second too long, holding the strap of her purse with both hands. People moved around her in clean coats and quiet shoes. Nobody rushed. Nobody looked lost. Even the silence seemed trained. A security guard checked her name, then nodded toward the elevators. 15th floor. Miss Miller. Miss Miller. Not Grace from the Harborlight. Not sweetheart. Not baby. Miss Miller. The elevator doors closed, reflecting her face back at her in soft gold light. She had worn the black dress again, the one with the repaired hem, and a gray coat she had bought from a thrift shop 2 years ago. She had polished her work shoes until the scuffs dulled, but they still looked like shoes that knew bus stops and kitchen floors. The doors opened to a reception area overlooking the harbor. A woman in a navy suit waited for her near a glass conference room. She had silver hair cut at her jaw and eyes sharp enough to read thoughts before people spoke them. Grace Miller. Yes, I'm Patricia Sloan. Grace offered her hand. Patricia shook it once. Firm, brief, no warmth wasted. Mr. Cole sees potential in you, Patricia said. Grace waited. Patricia's gaze moved from Grace's face to her shoes and back again. Potential is not performance. Do not confuse the two. Grace felt her cheeks heat, but she held Patricia's eyes. "I won't." "Good. Then we can begin." The conference room had a long table, a screen on one wall, and folders stacked in front of one chair. Grace sat there because it was the only place that looked assigned to someone who had something to prove. Patricia placed a pen beside the top folder. "For the next 6 weeks, you will learn operations, hiring, standards, inventory, control, food costs, vendor management, customer experience, scheduling, law, conflict handling, and financial reporting. You will be tested, repeatedly." Grace looked at the stack. That all? Patricia did not smile. "No, that is only Monday." By noon, Grace had filled 12 pages of notes. By 3, her head ached. By 5, she had learned that coffee was not just coffee. It was unit cost waste percentage, customer retention, cup size, equipment maintenance, labor allocation, and emotional memory. Patricia talked about margins as if they were pulse rates. She could look at a menu and see bleeding money. Grace listened until the words blurred, then forced them clear again. At the harbor light. If something broke, Marlene hit. It cursed at it, then called a cousin of somebody who owed her a favor. At Cole Development, every broken thing had a vendor code, a warranty record, and a budget impact. When the first day ended, Patricia closed her folder. "You look overwhelmed." Grace did not lie. "I am." "Good. That means you understand the size of the job." Grace stood gathering her notes. Patricia looked at the purse hanging from her chair. "What is in there?" Grace's hand tightened on the strap. "Nothing important." Patricia raised one eyebrow. Grace opened the purse and pulled out the old brass bell. For the first time, Patricia's expression changed. Only a little. From the diner, Grace nodded. "Marlene gave it to me." Patricia touched the bell with one finger. Sentimental objects can become clutter. Grace slid the bell back into her purse. "Not this one." Patricia studied her for a long moment. "Then make sure it earns its place." That night, Grace sat at her kitchen table with her notes spread around a bowl of noodles. She read until the radiator hissed and the city outside her window fell quiet. When her eyes burned, she washed her face with cold water and returned to the table. On Wednesday, she learned scheduling software. On Thursday, she learned how to read vendor contracts. On Friday, Patricia gave her a fake profit and loss statement and asked what was wrong with it. Grace stared at the columns until panic climbed her throat. "I don't know." Patricia folded her hands. "Look again." Grace did. Numbers sat in neat rows, smug and unreadable. "I still don't know." "Then start with what you do understand." Grace took a breath. Coffee sales looked strong. Labor looked high. Food waste looked higher. One supplier had raised prices by 17%, but the menu price had not changed. Grace tapped the page. "This vendor is killing us." Patricia leaned back. "Better." Grace let out the breath she had been holding. Was that a test? Everything is a test. At the end of the second week, Adrian came to observe a design meeting. Grace had not seen him since she signed the contract. She knew he was in the building. Everyone knew when Adrian Cole was in the building. People's voices changed. Assistants stood straighter. Phones were answered faster. Still, when he entered the room, Grace's body reacted before her mind could stop it. He wore a dark suit and no tie, his hair slightly damp from the rain. He greeted Patricia, nodded to the architect, and took the chair at the head of the table. His gaze found Grace for less than a second. It was enough. Vivian Sterling arrived 2 minutes later in ivory silk and a camel coat carrying a leather portfolio. She smelled like roses and money. The architect, Michael Reed, pulled up renderings on the screen. The cafe looked beautiful. Too beautiful. White marble counters, pale wood, slim chairs, glass pendant lights. People in the mock-up stood around looking thin, wealthy, and temporary. Vivian smiled. This gives the waterfront a cleaner identity, elevated but approachable. Grace stared at the image, approachable to whom Patricia said nothing. Adrian watched the screen, one hand resting near his mouth. Vivian continued. We can position it as premium neighborhood hospitality. Artisanal coffee, limited breakfast menu, curated pastries. No visual clutter, no old diner nostalgia. Grace looked down at her folder. Her notes from the harbor light sat beneath Patricia's spreadsheets. June likes the corner because she can see the door. Walter needs a wall behind him. Dock workers eat fast but stay longer if nobody rushes them. Marlene says light matters most in winter. Grace raised her hand before she could talk herself out of it. Vivian stopped speaking. Yes, she said, as if granting a favor. Grace stood because sitting made her feel small. Where does June sit? Vivian blinked. I'm sorry, June Whitaker. She came to the harbor light every morning. Lavender coat. Window booth. Her husband died 7 years ago, but she still orders toast for 2 when she's tired. Where does she sit in this design? The room went still. Vivian's mouth tightened. This is not a replica of the diner. I know. Then I'm not sure one elderly customer should dictate the plan. Grace felt heat rise in her chest. It is not about one customer. It is about whether people like her walk in and feel welcome or walk in and understand instantly that the place was not built for them. Vivian gave a polished laugh. Emotional loyalty is admirable, but this project has financial requirements. Grace turned to Adrian. He had not moved. She looked back at Vivian. People stay where they feel seen. They bring friends. They build habits. Habits become revenue. Patricia's eyes flicked toward her, almost approving. Grace kept going. The counter should be warmer. The chairs need backs people can sit in longer than 15 minutes. There should be a shelf with books from Walter Reed's store. We need at least one coffee option priced like the old place, not hidden, not embarrassing to order. And the corner by the window should belong to people who come alone but do not want to feel lonely. No one spoke. Then Michael Reed leaned toward the screen. I can work with that. Vivian looked at Adrian. Adrian. He looked at the rendering, then at Grace. She's right. Vivian's jaw tightened so slightly Grace almost missed it. Almost. After the meeting, Grace stayed behind to collect her papers. Adrian remained by the windows, looking down at the old block where demolition fencing had already gone up. You did well, he said. Grace kept her eyes on her folder. I was nervous. I know. That made her look up. His mouth curved faintly. You get louder when you're nervous. I do not. You absolutely do. She should have been annoyed. She was. A little. But he said it like he had noticed something worth keeping. Grace tucked the folder against her chest. I meant what I said. I know that too. Outside, rain streaked the glass, turning the city into gray watercolor. Adrian looked back at the harbor. I grew up 6 blocks from here. Grace's breath caught. You did. In a row house with bad heat and a roof that leaked over my mother's bed. She worked nights cleaning offices downtown. I used to wait for her at a diner on Eastern Avenue because it was warm, and the waitress let me sit with a cup of water. His voice did not change, but something old moved beneath it. Grace stepped closer before thinking better of it. What happened to that place? Adrian's eyes stayed on the rain. It became a cocktail bar. The answer sat between them. Grace thought of the harbor light of cracked booths and coffee steam, and Marlene's hands dusted with flour. Is that why you want this cafe to be different? Adrian turned. His face was controlled again. One reason. She waited for another. He did not give it. Training became harder after that. Patricia pushed Grace through mock interviews, emergency drills, budget revisions, and customer complaint scenarios. So realistic, Grace once apologized to an imaginary woman for a cold muffin with full sincerity. Vivian appeared at meetings with new objections. Too much local sourcing, too much seating, too much warmth, too much grace. Grace learned to arrive prepared. She brought numbers, customer examples, cost comparisons, and backup vendors. She stopped apologizing before she spoke. She learned the difference between being polite and making herself smaller. One afternoon, 3 weeks before opening, disaster arrived by email. Their main coffee supplier pulled out. The message was brief, corporate, and devastating. Patricia read it twice. Michael cursed under his breath. Vivian folded her arms. "We delay the opening." Grace looked up. "No." Vivian turned to her. "This is not the Harbor Light, Grace. We cannot buy coffee from a grocery shelf and hope for charm." Grace felt the old shame flare, then burn clean. "I know that." Adrian, who had been silent near the door, watched her. Patricia asked, "What do you suggest Grace thought of a small roaster Marlene had once praised, a family business in West Baltimore, whose beans came in paper bags with handwritten labels? The owner's son had delivered samples to the Harbor Light twice, though Marlene never had enough money to switch suppliers." Grace grabbed her coat. "I need 3 hours." Patricia looked at Adrian. He looked at Grace. "Take Eli," he said. "I can get there myself." "I know." The sentence held no argument, only concern. Eli Mercer drove her through rain-slick streets to a brick warehouse that smelled like roasted beans and warm sugar. The business was called Freeman Coffee. The owner, Denise Freeman, greeted Grace with cautious eyes until Grace explained the project. The opening, the need, and the chance to make a local supplier part of the cafe's identity. Denise listened without smiling. "My son says big developers like local stories until local people ask to be paid on time." Grace nodded. "He's probably right." Denise studied her. "You work for Cole?" "Yes." "You believe him?" Grace looked around the roastery at burlap sacks stacked near the wall, at the young man checking beans by hand, at the heat rising from the machine. "I believe in what I'm building." Denise smiled then. "Good answer." Grace returned with samples, pricing, delivery capacity, and a proposal. Patricia approved the numbers. Michael loved the story. Vivian called it risky. Grace placed a cup of Freeman dark roast in front of her. "Try it." Vivian did. Her face betrayed her before her pride could catch up. Adrian saw. "So Freeman Coffee," he said. Grace let herself smile. So Freeman Coffee. The lighthouse cup opened on a cold morning in early spring. Grace arrived before dawn, carrying the brass bell wrapped in Marlene's scarf. The cafe glowed softly from the inside, warm against the blue dark. Exposed brick, reclaimed wood, deep green booths, a long counter with brass trim, shelves for books along one wall, round tables near the windows, outlets for students, chairs with strong backs for people who planned to stay. At the front corner near the best light sat a booth with a small brass plaque, reserved for anyone who needs a quiet place. Grace mounted the old Harbor Light bell above the counter herself. When it rang for the first time, the sound was smaller than she remembered and somehow bigger. June Whitaker was the first customer. She stepped in wearing the lavender coat, her eyes moving slowly around the room. Grace held her breath. June saw the corner booth. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Gracie." Grace came around the counter. "Too much." June shook her head. "Just enough." Walter arrived next with a box of used books and a complaint ready. "If your coffee tastes like ambition, I'm leaving." Grace poured him the Harbor Light blend. $2. Same as before. Walter took one sip. His face stayed stern. "That will do." By noon, the cafe was full. Dock workers stood beside office workers. Students bent over laptops. A mother fed toast to her toddler. Patricia moved quietly through the room, correcting small problems before they became large ones. Vivian arrived, looked around, and said nothing at all. Adrian came near closing. He did not enter with cameras or reporters. He stood near the back wall watching Grace move through the cafe with coffee in one hand and sunlight on her face. When the last customer left, Grace locked the door and leaned back against it, exhausted enough to feel hollow. Then she saw Adrian stacking chairs. A laugh escaped before she could stop it. "You know we have people for that." He lifted one chair onto a table. "I was told sentiment has to earn its place." Grace looked at the bell above the counter. "Patricia said that. She says many terrifying things." Grace smiled. The cafe was quiet now. Rain tapped the windows. The lights were low. Adrian stood a few feet away, sleeves rolled back, his expensive shirt slightly wrinkled from work he did not need to do. For once he looked less like a man who owned the city and more like a man who had been allowed inside somewhere warm. He stepped closer. Grace. Her name changed the room. She should have moved. She did not. "I tried to keep this professional," he said. "You did a terrible job." His smile came slow, real, and dangerous in a way that made her forget the cold outside. "I know." Grace's heartbeat climbed. "This is complicated." "Yes. You are my boss. Patricia is your boss. That is not as comforting as you think." He stopped close enough that she could see the faint scar near his jaw. "Tell me to leave." Her fingers curled against the edge of the counter. She thought of Marlene, the diner, the contract, the money, the warning in her own head. Then Adrian looked at her the way he had that first day, as if her smile had found something in him he had buried too deep to name. Grace whispered, "I don't want you to." He touched her face with one hand, careful enough to give her every chance to step away. She did not. When he kissed her, it was not gentle for long. It was months of silence breaking open. It was coffee and rain and old grief and new hunger. It was dangerous, yes, but so was everything that had changed her life. Grace gripped his shirt and kissed him back. Above them, the old bell trembled softly in the draft from the door, giving one faint note into the empty cafe. Grace heard it after Adrian kissed her. A small sound, almost shy, as if the past had cleared its throat and reminded her that nothing beautiful came without a witness. She stepped back first, not because she wanted distance, but because she needed air. Adrian let her go at once. That was the strange thing about him. He had the presence of a man who could take anything yet with her. He waited. He watched. He gave space even when his eyes said, space cost him. Grace pressed 2 fingers to her lips. The kiss still lived there. "This is a mistake," she whispered. Adrian looked at her in the low cafe light. His shirt wrinkled. His sleeves rolled his mouth softer than she had ever seen it. "Probably." She laughed once, breathless and scared. "You are not supposed to agree with me. I have found honesty works better with you. You are learning." His eyes warmed. "I am trying." That should not have moved her. It did anyway. They cleaned the cafe in silence after that, though the silence had changed. Every small motion felt charged. Their hands reached for the same cloth and stopped. Their shoulders brushed near the sink. Adrian carried a crate of cups to the back room like a man trying to prove he could be useful in a world that did not need him to command it. When he walked her to the door, rain had softened the city into streaks of gold and black. Eli Mercer waited near the curb beside Adrian's car. He glanced once at Grace, then at Adrian, and his expression revealed nothing. That was Eli's gift. The man could have watched a building collapse and merely adjusted his cuff. Adrian opened the back door for Grace. "I can take the bus." "I know." There it was again. Not an argument. Not exactly. Grace looked at him. "You do that a lot. What say you no?" Then continue doing whatever you were already doing. A faint smile touched his mouth. I am difficult. That is a gentle word for it. The drive to her apartment was quiet. Eli drove. Adrian sat beside her in the back seat, close enough that Grace could feel the heat of him far enough that he did not touch. Outside, Baltimore moved past in wet brick street lamps, closed shops, and people walking fast with their collars up. When they reached her building, Grace reached for the door handle. Adrian said her name. She turned. His face was half-shadowed by the car's interior. I do not want this to damage what you are building. Grace looked at him for a long moment. You mean the cafe? I mean you. Her hand loosened on the door. The words entered her carefully like a blade slipped between ribs without blood. I can protect myself, she said. I believe that. But, his jaw tightened. But my world is not gentle. Grace glanced toward the cracked steps of her building, the flickering hall light, the mailbox with her name written on tape. Neither is mine. Adrian did not answer. That night, Grace barely slept. The kiss replayed in pieces, his hand against her cheek, his mouth on hers, the way he had asked her to tell him to leave like a man praying for mercy and expecting refusal. By morning, life arrived with no respect for romance. The Lighthouse Cup opened at 6:30. The espresso machine jammed at 7. Walter complained that the new napkins lacked moral fiber. June asked if Adrian would be coming by then, pretended she had only asked because he needed to learn how to drink normal coffee. Patricia arrived at 9 with a clipboard and noticed everything Grace wished she would not. At 10:15, Patricia followed Grace into the storage room. Are you sleeping with him? Grace nearly dropped a box of stirrers. Good morning to you, too. That is not an answer. Grace set the box on a shelf. No. Patricia watched her. Grace felt her face heat. Not that it is any of your business. Patricia folded her arms. It became my business the moment it could affect this operation. Grace turned. I know what I am doing. No, Patricia said calmly. You know what you feel. Those are not the same thing. Grace hated how much that landed. Patricia lowered her voice. Adrian Cole is not a cruel man. But he is complicated. He built his life in rooms where ordinary rules did not apply. That leaves marks. Grace looked away. He told me he grew up poor. That is true. He told me he has tried to do better. That is also true. Patricia stepped closer. But the past does not disappear because a man falls in love. It waits for the softest place to strike. Grace forced a laugh. You make him sound like a war. Patricia's face did not soften. He has been one. For the next few months, Grace tried to keep her balance. By day, she ran the Lighthouse Cup. By night, Adrian entered her life in careful increments. Dinner after late meetings. Walks along the harbor when the city had emptied out. Quiet hours at his penthouse, where glass walls looked over Baltimore like the whole city had been placed beneath him for judgment. Sometimes Grace hated the view. Sometimes she loved it. Sometimes she stood barefoot by the window in one of his shirts and felt so far from the girl with the broken coat zipper that she had to touch her own wrist to make sure she was still real. Adrian was different when they were alone. He cooked badly but confidently. He listened to old soul records. He read late at night with one hand in her hair. He had a dry sense of humor that appeared without warning. He knew the best streets for midnight drives and the worst diners in 3 states. He touched her like he was grateful and afraid at the same time. But there were doors in him that stayed locked. Phone calls he took in another room. Names that made Eli appear from nowhere. Meetings that turned Adrian's face cold before he kissed Grace goodbye. Once she woke at 3 in the morning and found him standing in the dark living room, looking down at the harbor with a glass of water untouched in his hand. "You okay?" she asked. He turned too fast. Then he smiled. Yes. Grace knew a lie when it came dressed gently. Still, she did not push. Not then. The first threat came on a Thursday night. Rain fell hard against the cafe windows, turning the streetlights into trembling halos. Grace had sent the last barista home early because business had slowed after 9. She stayed behind to finish inventory, count the register, and wipe down the counter. The old harbor light bell hung above her silent. At 10:12, the front door opened. The bell rang. Grace looked up. 3 men walked in. Not customers. She knew before they spoke. They entered with the relaxed confidence of men who had never worried about being unwelcome. Their coats were dark. Their shoes were clean despite the rain. The tallest one had silver hair brushed back from a face that might have been handsome if warmth had ever lived there. Grace kept her voice steady. "We're closed." The silver-haired man smiled. "Lights are on." "Because I'm closing." He looked around the cafe, slowly taking in the books, the reclaimed wood, the warm lights, the old bell. His smile deepened. Adrian always did like dressing up ghosts. Grace's fingers moved beneath the counter toward her phone. The man saw it. "Call him if you want. I'd rather he hear this from you." Grace did not move. "Who are you, Vincent Rourke?" The name hit her body before her mind caught up. Rourke. The old rumors. The courthouse photograph. The man beside Adrian with the smiling mouth and dead eyes. Vincent stepped closer to the counter. "Tell Adrian debts do not die. They wait." Grace forced herself not to step back. "I am not his messenger." Vincent's eyes moved over her face. "No, you are worse than that." One of the men behind him laughed softly. Vincent reached into his coat. Grace's heart slammed once hard. He pulled out a small matchbook and placed it on the counter. Black cover, silver raven. "You became the message the day he started looking at you like salvation." Grace's mouth went dry. Vincent leaned in just enough for her to smell rain and smoke on his coat. Pretty things are easiest to break when a man thinks they make him good. Then he turned and left. The bell rang as the door shut behind them. Grace stood frozen until the sound faded. Then her knees nearly gave out. She called Adrian. He answered on the first ring. "Grace." The warmth in his voice almost broke her. She swallowed hard. Vincent Rourke was here. Silence. Not empty silence. A silence full of doors slamming closed. "Where are you?" "The cafe. Lock the door. Go to the office. Do not stand near the windows." Adrian. Now Grace. The command in his voice cut through the panic. She moved. By the time Adrian arrived, Eli and 2 other men were with him. Adrian entered first. Soaked from the rain, his face changed into something Grace had only glimpsed in rumors. Cold, precise, lethal. He came straight to her. "Did he touch you? No. Did anyone hurt you? No." His hands hovered near her arms as if he wanted to check for injuries, but remembered she had not given permission. Grace saw that restraint and hated that it made her want to cry. She held up the matchbook. Adrian stared at it. Something dark moved across his face. Grace closed her fingers around the matchbook. "You need to tell me everything." Adrian looked at Eli. "Clear the street. Pull the footage. No police yet." Grace's fear sharpened. "No police." His eyes came back to hers. "We need to talk somewhere secure." "No," she said. "We talk here." Grace. Here. For a second she thought he might argue. Then he nodded once. They sat in the back office, the same cramped room where she had once watched Marlene cry over the future. Adrian remained standing until Grace said, "Sit down before you start looking like a threat in a suit." He sat. For the first time since she had known him, he looked tired in a way money could not disguise. "Years ago, I borrowed money from Vincent Rourke," he said. Grace waited. Adrian looked at his hands. "I was 26, broke, angry, hungry in every sense. I had a chance to buy a building no bank would finance. Rourke offered the money. And you took it." "Yes." "What else did you take?" His jaw tightened. "Introductions. Protection. Access to contracts I should not have had." Grace felt cold settle through her. "You laundered money." "Yes." The word did not hide. It just fell. Grace gripped the edge of the desk. "Did you hurt people?" Adrian looked at her then. "Not with my hands." "That is not an answer." "No," he said quietly. "It is the coward's version of one." Grace stared at him. The man she loved sat 5 feet away, and between them stood every door he had kept locked. "I helped make dirty money clean. I looked away from where it came from. I signed papers that displaced people. I took profit from men who used fear as a business model. I told myself I was only building, only surviving, only doing what powerful men had always done." His voice roughened. "Then I became one." Grace rose from the chair because sitting still hurt. "You let me fall in love with you without telling me this." Adrian flinched. "I thought I had put enough distance between that life and this one. That is not the same as telling me." "I know." "Do you—" Her voice broke on the words. She hated that too. "Because I stood in front of Vivian and Patricia, and every person who thought I was some poor girl you dragged into your world because she smiled at you and I defended you. I believed the better version of you because you showed me just enough of him to make me brave." Adrian stood slowly. "I never lied about loving you. No, you just let me love a man who was not finished telling the truth." The sentence hit him like a physical blow. His eyes shone, but his voice stayed low. "You are right." Grace wanted him to defend himself, wanted him to say something arrogant, something unforgivable, something that made leaving clean. Instead, he gave her the truth and left her with the mess of still loving him. "I need space," she said. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "Okay, I mean it. No calls, no texts, no late-night driver at the curb like this is a movie and I am the girl who forgives too fast." His mouth tightened, but he nodded. "You need protection. I need a life that does not require it. You are at risk because of me." Grace looked at him. "That may be the truest thing you have said tonight." Eli drove her home. A car remained across the street after she went inside. Protection, Adrian would call it. Grace stood behind the curtain and watched the headlights for a long time. 4 days passed. Grace worked. She slept badly. She answered questions with half-truths. The cafe stayed busy, but everything felt touched by the matchbook now. Every man in a dark coat made her pulse jump. Every phone call from an unknown number froze her hand. Adrian kept his promise. He did not call. That should have helped. It did not. On the 4th morning, someone pounded on her apartment door. Grace sat upright in bed, heart hammering. Miss Miller Eli called from the hallway. "Open the door." She grabbed her robe and looked through the peephole. Eli stood outside, not calm now. That frightened her more than the knocking. She opened the door. What happened? Eli's face was pale. Adrian was shot, leaving a meeting. For a second, the words meant nothing. They were shapes, sounds. Then they entered her. Grace reached for the door frame. "Is he alive?" "Yes. He is in surgery." The hallway tilted. Eli stepped forward, steadying her by the elbow. "We have to move you. I need to see him. Not yet. I need to see him. Grace." She looked at him with such force that even Eli stopped. "Take me to him." 3 hours later, she entered a private hospital floor through a service elevator. Security men lined the hallway. Patricia stood near the waiting room window, her face drawn tight. When she saw Grace, something like relief cracked through her. "He asked for you before they took him in." Grace pressed one hand to her mouth. "How bad, shoulder? Blood loss. They say he will live. They say." Grace hated those words. When she was finally allowed into his room, Adrian looked nothing like the untouchable man from the tower office. He was pale against white sheets bandaged heavily, an IV taped to his hand. His eyes opened when she came closer. "Grace." His voice was a rasp. She took his uninjured hand. "You absolute idiot." His mouth curved weakly. "I missed your bedside manner." Tears blurred her vision. "I hate you a little." "I know." "No, you do not get to use that line right now." He tried to laugh, then winced. She sat beside him, still holding his hand. "Was it Rourke?" "We do not know." "Tell me the rest." His eyes darkened. "Grace, you are tired. I am done being protected from information that can hurt me." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then the last of his defenses lowered. He told her about the first deal, the second, the favors, the men who came smiling with violence in their pockets. The neighborhoods bought cheap because fear had lowered the price. The permits pushed through with money that should never have existed. The way success had made every compromise easier until he no longer recognized the line he had crossed. Grace listened without interrupting. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she wanted to leave. Sometimes she wanted to climb into the bed beside him and hold him until the past stopped bleeding through the walls. When he finished, dawn had begun to pale the windows. "I have spent years trying to build something better," Adrian said. "But better does not erase what paid for the foundation." Grace squeezed his hand. "No, it does not. I understand if you walk away." She looked at the bandage on his shoulder, the bruises beneath his eyes. The man who had frightened her, saved her, lied by omission, loved her with a hunger that felt like prayer, and finally told the truth when the cost had arrived at his door. "I love you," she said. His breath caught. "But I will not be your excuse." Adrian's eyes shone. "If you choose revenge, if you go back to those men, if you answer blood with blood and call it protection, I am gone." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "And if I do not," Grace leaned closer, "then tell me how we make this right." For a long moment, Adrian only looked at her. The hospital room was pale with dawn. Machines whispered beside the bed. Rain tapped softly against the window, the kind of thin morning rain that made the city look washed but never clean. Grace sat with her hand wrapped around his, feeling the weak pressure of his fingers, feeling the heat of his skin, feeling the truth between them like a wound neither of them could close with pretty words. Adrian turned his face toward the window. "I know men who could end this by tonight," he said. Grace went still. His voice was quiet, but there was no uncertainty in it. That frightened her more than anger would have. "And Vincent?" she asked. "Vincent, whoever ordered the shooting. Anyone who thinks you are leverage." The monitor beside him kept its soft rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Grace pulled her hand from his. Adrian closed his eyes as if he had expected it and still hated the feeling. "So that is the answer," she asked. "You kill the past before it kills you." I said I know men. I did not say I called them, but you thought about it. His silence was enough. Grace stood and walked to the window. Below, Baltimore was beginning another day. Cars slid through wet streets. A bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere, a delivery man carried crates through a service entrance. Life moved on beneath hospital glass, unaware that one man's choice could spill blood across half the city. "You told me you wanted out," she said. "I do." "No. You want out if it is clean. You want redemption if it comes with your power intact. You want to be forgiven without becoming weak." Adrian looked at her then, and pain moved through his face. "I have been weak before, Grace. Weak gets people crushed. So does power when it belongs to a man who is afraid to lose it." The words struck hard. She saw it. For once, Adrian Cole had no answer ready. Grace turned from the window. "I am not asking you to become harmless. I am asking you to become honest." A bitter sound escaped him. "Honest men go to prison. Then maybe guilty men should." The room changed. Adrian's expression closed not in anger, but in recognition. He looked suddenly older. Not 38 and untouchable, but a boy grown into a man who had spent half his life outrunning a door that now stood open in front of him. Grace softened, but she did not step closer. "If you choose revenge, you will survive. Maybe. You will scare people. You will win for a while. You will tell yourself you did it to protect me." Her voice shook, but she held it steady. "And every time I look at you, I will know I was the excuse you used to become that man again." Adrian stared at the blanket over his legs. "I do not know if there is a way back from everything I have done." Grace sat again, close enough that he could see the tears in her eyes, far enough that forgiveness was not automatic. "Then stop looking for a way back. Build a way forward." He gave a small, broken laugh. "That sounds like something you would put on a coffee shop wall. Do not make me throw hospital water at you." His mouth curved faintly, then faded. "What are you asking me to do? Tell the truth. To someone who can do something with it." He looked toward the door where Eli stood outside the glass panel, arms, crossed eyes, scanning the hallway. "You do not understand what that means. Then explain it." Adrian swallowed. "If I talk, Vincent goes down. Maybe. Others too. Men with money. Men with badges. Men who sit on boards and smile at fundraisers. But I go down with them." Grace nodded. "Yes. I lose the company. Maybe. My buildings. My name. My freedom. Yes." His voice dropped. "And you." Grace reached for his hand again. This time he did not close around her fingers right away. She waited until he did. "You only lose me if you choose the lie." Adrian stared at their joined hands. "I am afraid." The confession was so quiet she almost missed it. Grace bent her head until her forehead touched his knuckles. "I know." That afternoon, Vincent Rourke came to the hospital. He arrived alone. No guards, no dramatic entrance. Just a man in a dark wool coat walking through a private corridor as if every locked door in the world had already learned to open for him. Eli stepped in front of him. Vincent smiled. "Easy, Mercer. If I wanted trouble, you would hear it before you saw me." Grace stood near Adrian's bed. Adrian had insisted she leave before Vincent entered. Grace had refused. He had been too weak to argue and too wise to try. Vincent looked at her with pleased recognition. There she is. The girl with the honest eyes. Grace said nothing. Vincent moved into the room, his gaze drifting over Adrian's bandaged shoulder. "You look terrible." Adrian's face went cold. "You risked coming here to insult me. I came here because someone shot you, and now people are whispering my name. Did you order it?" Vincent placed one hand over his heart. "I am wounded. Answer me." The smile disappeared from Vincent's face. "No. If I wanted you dead, Adrian, you would not be sitting here holding hands with your conscience. Grace felt Adrian's grip tighten. Vincent's eyes flicked to their joined hands, touching. Truly, the reformed king and the waitress who taught him to bleed in public. Adrian's voice sharpened. Why are you here? Vincent stepped closer to the bed. Because whoever shot you did us both a favor. It reminded you that the world you crawled out of still knows your name. He reached into his coat. Eli's hand moved beneath his jacket. Vincent noticed and laughed softly, then removed a sealed envelope and placed it on the table. A proposal. Adrian did not touch it. Vincent continued. There are people circling your projects. Old partners. New enemies. Men who think you have gone soft because you are building cute little coffee shops and kissing girls under brass bells. Grace's blood chilled. Vincent looked at her. Yes, sweetheart. People notice love. It makes even smart men stupid. Adrian tried to sit. Strader winced and failed. Vincent smiled again. I can make the noise stop. I can find the shooter. I can keep the girl safe. I can remind everyone that Adrian Cole is not prey. And the price? Nothing you have not paid before. The room seemed to lose air. Grace understood before he said it. Adrian did too. Vincent leaned in, voice soft and poisonous. One development fund, quiet money, old clients, clean paper. You do what you always did, but smarter, safer, less personal. Adrian stared at him. Vincent lowered his voice. Do not throw away an empire for a woman who thinks goodness is free. Grace felt the words like a slap, but she did not move. Adrian's eyes shifted to her. There it was. The door. One step back into the old world. One signature. One compromise dressed as protection. Grace looked at him and gave nothing away. No pleading, no rescue, only the truth of her presence. Adrian reached for the envelope. Vincent's smile widened. Adrian picked it up, tore it in half, then in half again. The paper fell into the wastebasket beside the bed. Vincent's smile vanished. Adrian's voice was weak but clear. I am done being owned by men like you. Vincent looked at him for a long time. Then he turned his gaze to Grace. You hear that little saint? That is the sound of a man choosing a grave because you made it look noble. Grace stepped forward. No. That is the sound of a man finally choosing his own life. Vincent studied her. For 1 second, his eyes were not amused. Then he stepped back. You both think the truth protects people. He buttoned his coat. It does not. It exposes them. He left without another word. The next morning, Adrian asked for his lawyer. By afternoon, his lawyer had arrived with 2 associates, 3 sealed files, and the expression of a man entering a burning building with a glass of water. His name was Martin Vale, and he had the calm misery of someone paid very well to prevent exactly this kind of decision. He listened while Adrian spoke. Then he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. You understand what you are saying? Adrian sat upright in the hospital bed, pale but steady. Yes. You are discussing cooperation with federal prosecutors in matters involving organized crime, financial fraud, bribery, money laundering, and potentially obstruction. Grace stood near the window. Patricia sat in the corner. Eli leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, saying nothing. Adrian nodded. Yes. Martin looked at Grace, then back at Adrian. You will not walk away untouched. I know. You may lose Cole Development. I know. You may serve time. Adrian's eyes dropped for only a second. I know. Martin sighed. And this is not a romantic gesture. Grace stiffened. Adrian's voice cooled. "Do not insult her. I am trying to save you from destroying your life for guilt and a woman." Adrian looked at Grace. Then he looked back at his lawyer. "My life has been destroying itself for years. I was too busy calling it success to notice." Martin sat back. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. "If he does this, the company needs a containment plan." Adrian looked at her. "Can you keep the lighthouse cup protected?" Patricia's eyes moved to Grace. "That depends on whether Grace is ready to fight for it." Grace straightened. "I am." Patricia nodded once, then yes. The meeting with federal prosecutors happened 2 days later in a secured conference room on another private floor of the hospital. Adrian wore a clean shirt over his bandages. His face was pale, his jaw unshaven, but his eyes were clear. Grace was not allowed inside. She waited in the hall with Eli. Through the frosted glass, she could see shadows moving. "Adrian?" "Martin." 2 prosecutors. A federal agent. Files spread across a table. Hours passed. Grace drank terrible coffee from a hospital machine and thought about the harbor light. She thought about Marlene telling her to make it count. She thought about the first time Adrian had looked at her as if a smile could become a rope thrown into deep water. She thought about every person hurt by men who called greed survival. Eli stood beside her. After a long silence, he said, "He could have run." Grace looked at him. "Would you have helped him?" Eli did not answer quickly. "I have helped him do many things." "That is not an answer." "No," Eli said. "But it is the one I have." Grace studied him. "Why did you stay?" Eli looked toward the conference room. "Because sometimes a man starts walking toward the right thing and somebody has to watch his back until he gets there." When the door finally opened, Adrian came out looking exhausted. Grace stood. He found her eyes before anyone else's. "It is done," he said. Not finished. Done. There was a difference. News broke within a week. At first only whispers, then headlines, then cameras outside the Lighthouse Cup. Adrian Cole cooperating in federal investigation. Developer linked to Rourke Financial Network. Baltimore waterfront project under scrutiny. Grace Miller identified as manager of Cole-backed cafe. The first reporter came at 7 in the morning, standing too close to the door with a microphone and a smile that pretended to be friendly. "Miss Miller, did you know about Mr. Cole's criminal ties when you accepted the position?" Grace kept walking. "Miss Miller, are you romantically involved with him?" She unlocked the cafe door and stepped inside without answering. By 9, there were 4 reporters outside. By noon, 6. Customers hesitated before entering. Some turned away. Online comments multiplied with vicious speed. People called the cafe a front. They called Grace naive. They called her worse. They posted photos of her apartment building, the harbor light, her parents' obituary. At 2, Vivian Sterling arrived like a blade in a white coat. Grace met her near the counter. Vivian removed her sunglasses. "You need to close for a few days." Grace wiped her hands on a towel. "No." Vivian's smile was thin. "This is not a request made from emotion. The brand is contaminated." The brand. The cafe is associated with Adrian. Adrian is associated with a federal criminal investigation. Public perception matters. Grace looked around the room. June sat in her corner booth, chin lifted toward the window where reporters gathered. Walter shelved donated books as if preparing for war. 2 dock workers drank coffee at the counter and glared at anyone with a camera. "This is not a brand," Grace said. "It is a place." Vivian leaned closer. "Places close when money dries up." "Then I guess I better keep selling coffee." Vivian's eyes hardened. "You are out of your depth." Grace smiled without warmth. I have been out of my depth since I was 21. I learned to swim tired. Patricia arrived an hour later and found Grace in the office staring at payroll numbers. "You sent Vivian away," Patricia said. Grace did not look up. She walked out on her own. That was either brave or stupid. Can it be both? Usually. Patricia closed the door. The board wants distance from Adrian. Some want you replaced. Grace looked up then. Because of him, because you are attached to him. Grace's throat tightened. I earned this job. Yes, Patricia said. Now you have to keep earning it in front of people who wanted you to fail before they had a reason. Grace leaned back in the chair. I am tired. Patricia's face softened by a fraction. I know. For once there was no test in her voice. Grace stood, walked into the main room and clapped her hands once. The staff looked up from behind the counter from tables, from the pastry case. Listen, she said. The cafe quieted. People are going to talk. They are going to point cameras at the windows. They are going to decide what this place is before they ever taste the coffee. Her voice steadied as she spoke. We cannot control that. We can control the room. We can make the coffee hot. We can keep the low-price blend ready. We can treat every person who walks through that door like they matter, unless they come in here to hurt someone, in which case Eddie is apparently volunteering to look terrifying near the entrance. Eddie lifted his mug. Born ready. A nervous laugh moved through the staff. Grace continued. This place was built to hold people. So, hold. The shift did not become easy after that, but it became possible. Days turned into weeks. The federal case grew. Vincent Rourke was arrested at a private club outside the city. 2 councilmen resigned. A former union official vanished and was later found in Florida. More names surfaced. More records appeared. Adrian's cooperation became a storm that broke over men who had believed themselves weatherproof. Adrian recovered slowly. He came to the cafe once against medical advice, wearing a coat over his sling. The room went quiet when he entered. Grace watched customers look at him with complicated faces. Some angry, some curious, some afraid. June Whitaker stared at him for a long time. Then she pointed to the chair across from her. If you sit, you drink drip coffee. None of that rich man espresso foolishness. Adrian looked at Grace. She shrugged. House rules. He sat. June poured cream into her own cup. You hurt people, she asked. The room seemed to stop breathing. Adrian looked at the coffee in front of him. Yes. You trying to fix it? Yes. June nodded. Try harder. Adrian bowed his head. I will. That was all. But after that, a few people who had stopped coming returned. Not because they forgave him. Because they trusted Grace enough to watch what she did with what remained. The trial came the following winter. Baltimore wore dirty snow along the curbs. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, photographers, police, and men in dark coats who tried to look like no one and failed. Grace entered through the front. Martin had offered a side door. Adrian had asked if she wanted privacy. Grace had said no. She was tired of hiding inside other people's shame. Inside the courtroom, Adrian sat at the defense table in a dark suit. He looked thinner than before, the sharpness of his face more severe. When he turned and saw Grace, something in him eased. She sat behind him, not beside his lawyers, not beside Patricia, behind him. Close enough for him to know she was there, far enough for everyone to understand she was not standing in front of his consequences. The prosecutor spoke for hours. Companies, accounts, payments, names, dates. The language was dry, but the damage beneath it was not. Families pushed out of buildings, businesses pressured into selling. Money cleaned through projects that looked respectable from the sidewalk. Permits moved faster after envelopes changed hands. Grace listened until her stomach hurt. Then Adrian took the stand. The courtroom shifted. He raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. His voice was steady at first. He admitted the loans, the laundering, the favors, the pressure campaigns he had known about and benefited from. He named Vincent. He named others. He did not blame youth. He did not blame poverty. He did not say he had no choice. At one point, the prosecutor asked Mr. Cole why come forward now. Adrian turned slightly. Not enough to look at Grace. Enough to know where she sat. Because silence kept paying me, he said. And I let it. The courtroom was quiet. He continued. I have spent years building places and calling them better. Some of them were. Some of them were built on harm I did not want to see. People paid for my ambition. They deserve more than my donations. They deserve the truth. Grace closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not because he was saved, because he was finally uncovered. Sentencing came 3 months later. 18 months in federal prison, massive restitution, sale of major assets, permanent removal from several development boards. Coal development would be restructured under federal oversight. The Lighthouse Cup would be separated into a community trust with employee ownership and a board seat for neighborhood representatives. Grace had fought for that. Patricia had fought with her. Marlene had come back from Florida for the hearing and sat beside Grace in a bright blue coat. When the judge read the sentence, Adrian did not look surprised. Grace did not cry until later. In the courthouse hallway, Adrian turned to her with 2 marshals waiting nearby. I am sorry, he said. I know. I love you. I know that too. He gave a faint, tired smile. You stole my line. Grace stepped close. She touched his face, once her palm against his jaw, feeling the warmth of him before the state took him away. I will not pause my life for 18 months, she said. His eyes searched hers. I do not want you to. I will run the cafe. I will build the trust. I will visit when I can. I will be angry some days. I will miss you most days. And when you come home honest, or you do not come home to me. Adrian nodded. That is fair. No, Grace said softly. It is what we have. The marshals led him away. Grace watched until he disappeared behind a door that closed without drama. A simple sound, metal catching metal, the kind of sound that changed a life. 18 months did not pass like a montage. They passed in receipts, repairs, staff schedules, legal meetings, winter mornings, broken espresso parts, grant applications, and nights when Grace went home too tired to remove her shoes before sitting on the floor. They passed in letters. Adrian wrote on lined paper. At first, his letters were careful. Updates about prison routines, books he was reading, financial literacy classes he had started teaching because men kept asking him how interest worked, how debt worked, how the world trapped people with numbers they were never taught to read. Then the letters changed. He wrote about his mother, about shame, about the first time he had bought a suit with money he knew was dirty and how proud he had felt anyway, about dreams where he stood in the harbor light and could not find the door. Grace wrote back after closing, sitting beneath the old bell. She told him when June got the flu and everyone took turns bringing soup. She told him Walter had started a poetry night and pretended it was against his will. She told him Eddie fixed the front step without being asked. She told him Marlene visited and cried when she saw the plaque near the counter. The plaque read, "For the places that kept us alive." The Lighthouse Cup became more than the project Adrian had imagined. Grace made sure of it. The low-cost Harbor Light blend stayed. A breakfast program began quietly, then openly. Students came every Tuesday night for free coffee during exams. Local artists hung work along the brick walls. Walter curated a community shelf. Marlene's small business fund gave its first grant to a woman opening a laundromat 2 blocks inland after losing her old one to redevelopment. The cafe made money, not the kind Vivian had wanted. Enough. Enough to pay staff well, enough to keep the lights warm, enough to prove that dignity did not have to be bad business. Patricia became chair of the trust board and pretended not to care when people praised her. "You are smiling," Grace told her after one meeting. "I have gas." "Liar." Patricia looked toward the busy cafe. "You did well." Grace grinned. That sounded painful. It was. They stood together in companionable silence as June scolded a teenager for putting his feet on a chair. The day Adrian came home, the sky was clear. No rain. That felt almost wrong. Grace drove an old blue pickup Marlene had sold her for $1 and a lecture about oil changes. She parked outside the federal facility and waited with both hands wrapped around the steering wheel. When Adrian walked out, he carried one duffel bag. No tailored coat, no entourage, no polished armor. He wore jeans, a plain gray sweater, and the uncertain expression of a man stepping into sunlight that no longer belonged to him. Grace got out of the truck. For a moment, they stood 20 feet apart. He looked at her as if he had imagined this moment so many times he no longer trusted the real one. Grace walked to him. He did not reach for her until she reached first. Then his arms came around her and held on like the world had narrowed to breath-cotton skin and the mercy of being allowed to return. His face pressed into her hair. "Grace." She closed her eyes. "You smell like prison soap." A laugh broke out of him, rough and startled. "I missed you too." She pulled back and looked at him. There were new lines around his eyes. He looked leaner, quieter. Something restless in him had burned down, not gone completely. Nothing that deep vanished, but changed. He touched her cheek. "You waited." "I lived," she said. He nodded slowly. "Good." The drive back to Baltimore was quiet at first. Adrian looked out the window at passing fields, then suburbs, then the city rising ahead. Grace watched his hands in her periphery. They rested loose on his knees, but once they reached the harbor, his fingers curled. "You okay?" she asked. "No." She smiled faintly. "Honesty. Look at you." He turned toward her. "I am afraid to walk in there." "The cafe." "Yes. Good." He looked at her. "Good. It means you understand it is not yours to enter like a king." He absorbed that, then nodded. The lighthouse cup was full when they arrived. Grace had not announced it. She had not wanted a spectacle. But somehow people knew. Maybe Patricia. Maybe Marlene. Maybe the city itself, which had always been better at gossip than mercy. The old bell rang when Adrian opened the door. Conversation softened. Not stopped. Softened. June sat in her corner booth wearing lavender. Walter stood near the bookshelves. Eddie leaned by the counter with his arms crossed. Patricia stood near the register. Marlene sat on a stool with a slice of pie in front of her, looking like she might cry and slap someone for noticing. Adrian froze just inside the door. Grace touched his wrist. "Breathe." He did. Then June pointed to the chair across from her. "You can sit if you are not too important for drip coffee now." A small laugh moved through the room. Adrian looked at Grace. She gave him a nod. He crossed the room slowly and sat. Grace went behind the counter. The old motions returned to her body. Mug, pot, pour, steam rising, coffee dark and plain. She carried it to him and set it down. $2, she said. Adrian looked up at her. For a second the room disappeared. No prison, no trial, no marble towers, no blood-stained money, no reporters, no ruined diner. Only a man and a woman on opposite sides of a coffee cup standing at the edge of everything they had broken and everything they had built. Adrian wrapped his hands around the mug. You smiled at me once when I did not deserve it. Grace leaned one hip against the booth. I remember. She looked around the cafe. At June in the corner. At Walter's books. At Marlene wiping her eyes with a napkin and pretending she had allergies. At Patricia watching like a general after a battle. At the old harbor light bell above the counter catching afternoon light. Then Grace looked back at Adrian. Because I did not know you yet. His face softened. The answer hurt him. It also freed him. Grace reached down and touched his hand. But I know you now. Adrian held very still. And you are still here? He asked. Grace thought of the girl she had been when he first walked into her life. Broke, tired, terrified, smiling because survival had trained her to soften the edges of cruel days. She thought of the man he had been. Dangerous, lonely, powerful enough to destroy a place and wounded enough to be changed by kindness. She thought of all the ways love had not saved them easily. It had demanded truth. It had taken money. It had taken power. It had taken time. Grace smiled. Not the waitress smile, not the survival smile, not the smile that started everything before she understood the cost. This one was chosen. Yes, she said. I am still here. Adrian bowed his head over the coffee as if it were something sacred. Outside, Baltimore moved under a clear sky. Inside, the cafe held its noise, its warmth, its people, its ghosts. The bell above the counter gave one soft note when the door opened again. Someone came in from the cold. Grace turned toward them with a mug already in her hand.